Welcome to the Sharing the Heart of the Matter podcast. Join us as we celebrate the brilliance of authors, storytellers, and creators. I'm Wynne Leon, and in this inspiring episode, Vicki and I are talking with author Danny Miller. Danny has written a book that brilliantly shares life lessons. It feels like part memoir and part philosophy. He tells us about the moment when he knew he needed to surrender control. From that moment, about 35 years ago, he started collecting the anecdotes about how to live in the flow of life that make up this insightful book. He tells us how he experiences flow in writing, painting, playing tennis, and more, and the creative cross-pollination that occurs. We learn about how to set things aside and not overpaint, so to speak, so that we gain some distance and perspective in our endeavors. We talk about the things that tend to dampen our experience, which Danny calls wave obstructors, and the opposite forces, like trust and humility, that are wave enhancers. Danny also shares with us what to do when there's a lull, how to navigate the moments when the waves are absent from the beach. We end with Danny reading his beautiful poem, Life's Lantern. This is a fantastic episode with a wholehearted author sharing valuable and vulnerable lessons. We know you'll love it. Hi, Danny.
Hello. Hi, Wynne, Vicki.
Vicki and I are so excited to see you. You know, we were just talking about how timely your book is, The Way of the Wave. I got a little glare there on it. Sorry. But we're so excited to have you on and to talk about this. I mean, it's one of our great pleasures in life to be able
I
to.
appreciate that. Looking forward to it as well.
Good. So you open the book with a moment of epiphany, I think or surrender, however you want to put it. Can you tell us that story?
Sure. I guess this was in the late 1980s, so it's almost 40 years ago. Let me just say this. I was always a controller by nature. I call myself a controller extraordinaire. I thought at work, certainly I controlled everything. But what I mean by that, I always thought that I knew it was best, that my way was the best way of doing things. And I was pretty persistent about it. I like to say I was quiet spoken, but I wasn't modest. And that carried over to my family life as well. Quite honestly, all to my detriment. So in the 80s, I experienced about a 5-year period. It was seemingly one traumatic event after another. I can go into details. Started with a mudslide where we lost our newly built deck. It had rained for 8 days in Los Angeles, and I woke up in the morning. I looked out, and it was dangling down the hill precariously close to our neighbor. I like to say I went and took a shower, had 3 cups of coffee. When I came back, it was still dangling. We had a very dangerous neighbor who eventually set fire in our garage by my car. My young son lived above that. You know, I was in the real estate business. I had one building burned down, another murder, another, just a slew of things. But I think the biggest thing was I felt betrayed by a business partner who stopped paying me my portion of what I was supposed to receive, reported us to the bank as being unstable, and the bank called my loans in excess of $1 million by today's dollars. So it was just sort of an ongoing thing. And during that period is my controlling reins would just rear up. You know, I tried to persist, just determined, and I ended up missing really important doctor appointments to remove a little lesion on my nose. And I ended up going later for it. Instead of a 20-minute procedure, it was 3 hours. I lost half my nose. I had about 5 major surgeries. So that's when I say I surrendered, because I did not have the energy, the wherewithal to keep going, you know.
Right.
I was broken. And so I went to the beach one day in Santa Monica to try to get some respite, and sitting on the rocks, I'm just noticing how the waves would come in, how they were random. They would be going in different directions. They were unpredictable. And it reminded me when I used younger and I used to body surf. And the one thing about waves is they are in control, not us. And that metaphor just struck me intuitively that there was something about this that was a key to my going forward, to my healing. And so that's why the original title of the book almost 40 years ago that I didn't publish was called The Wave. I just didn't know enough about how it worked or to be able to explain it to others. I sort of felt it, but didn't know, I didn't have the life experiences with it.
Right.
So it was really at that moment that I then started journaling and writing. And I wrote 15 chapters on the original title was called The Secret to My Survival. It was, I was trying to, how did I survive all this? And what brought me down? And those subjects are what I write about also in my new book, The Way of the Wave.
Yeah.
So it was a really turning point for me. It was the beginning of a healing journey. I think that in many ways still goes on to today, you know,
Yeah.
because we can always still heal.
Right. I think what is so good about your approach and the time that you've taken to write the book, you know, whether that be 40 years, but is that you include so many good anecdotes. I mean, it just makes it so relatable.
Thank you. Yeah. I wanted to make this book more personable. You know, I didn't want it wasn't to be like a self-help book. It was sort of from the concept, this has been my journey. These are the things that helped and worked for me. And hopefully it, you know, might work for you. And that's why I have prompts, as you know, at the end of each chapter so that the reader can maybe think about what in their life, if I'm writing about my propensity to judge or to control or to expect too much, is to try to get the reader in touch with that. And so, yeah, so that's why I included more personal stories this time.
I think
It's
those are so powerful
Mm.
that, you know, you can walk in the 80s, maybe not so much, but these days you can walk into, you know, any bookstore or, you know, an online retailer and see so many things that are in the category of self-help.
Yeah.
But Wynne and I've talked about this, you know, with other authors, so much of it, Danny, is just a retread of things, you know, and they're the principles. I think is most helpful for people is the storytelling and the first person, you know, this was my odyssey. This is how I survived, and
Yeah.
connecting those things together. And it requires a lot of vulnerability to bring all those pain points forward. But it's important, I think, because then the reader really gets a whole different level of richness and I think applicability then of those things you offer in the prompts.
Oh, thank you so much, Vicki. That warms my heart, really,
Yeah.
because that's what I had sort of hoped for. I
Yeah.
gave it to a friend to read the review copy, and he read it, and it's the first person I really had read it, and he says, "Danny, I think you've written an intimate memoir." And I said,
Yeah.
"What do you mean?" And
Yeah.
he said, "You were so open and revealing." I will say this, the people that are in my stories have consented to their being in my stories. That's also important, as you
Yeah.
probably know as writers, is you want to make them feel comfortable. And so some stories I didn't include, you know. So
Right.
Well, I'd also
Yeah.
say that sort of the whole concept of letting go of control and is shown in the way that you write it. Because you could say, do this, do this, do this, and it would be more in the sort of controlling vein. Or you
Yeah.
could say, here's what I tried and here's my story. And it's more going with, you know, letting people take away what they will take away.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting because I know you're both writers. Is I guess I have the privilege that I don't have deadlines to me because this is not my livelihood or anything. It's my hope of giving back. So I write when I'm in the mood to write when it feels right, and I try to actually go with the flow when I'm writing. And when I get too involved or too intense or too thinking too much, I'm getting into that restrictive, controlling pattern. And I say, okay, no writing. I'm going to go paint or I'm going to go play tennis. I
That's
love
so
tennis
good.
and I love painting.
Right.
So it was a 5-year journey and a wonderful one. And
Yeah, that's so good because that was one of my questions is how does the flow apply to writing? And you just answered it, which is, you know, it's amazing when it does, and then we start to overthink it, right?
exactly.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, being seasoned readers, all of us, you can tell when you're reading something and it lacks that note of authenticity, and you can just tell it was being written to get a task done. You know, like you said, Danny, that control, but just to get to a finish. And that, I mean, you couldn't do that with your topic because we'd sniff that out. We'd go, no, something is not right here. This is not right. But you also paint and you write poetry. So you have these other outlets that are amazing. The proficiency, right, Wynne, in so many creative categories. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to create a little story on that. I used to collect paintings from an artist. He was sort of an impressionist artist I got to know pretty well. And one day in my mid 40s, he sat me down in his studio and said, Danny, we're going to paint. He set up a little still life, some fruit and a little mirror. And I could never draw or anything as a kid, you know. And I started going, and these are oil paints, and within 20 minutes, I was so enthralled, you know, with what was unfolding. And I remember he'd said later, there's no such things as making mistakes, you know, and that just freed me. And I went home and I bought an easel and I put it by my desk, my work desk. So I would go back and forth between just my my intense type of working and focus to the easel, you know, and it was just it was wonderful, you know. So I've learned a lot about creativity and that's so much. Well, I have a chapter of that in the wave, and with the creativity, the same things that take us off the wave or get us out of the flow, like particularly control, judgment, expectations, that those can happen and do happen in the creative part of it, right?
Right.
If I'm too expectant of how a painting is going to turn out, I may have a great start and say, oh boy, this is going to be great. And then I start expecting and trying too hard. It goes astray, right? So it's just really interesting how these, what I call the wave objectors, play into what we're doing creatively as well.
Right. That's funny. We had an episode with an artist named Danny Gregory. So another
I
Danny.
watched part of it.
Yeah, and he said the same thing. Well, first of all, the thing about mirrors that you brought in from your lesson with your artist friend, how interesting it is to, you know, put a mirror in is fascinating to change the angle and perspective.
Yeah, no, I listened to what he said. It was so interesting. I have a painting. I have my paintings on my website, and the one that I'm focused on is one I did not. It was more of an abstract piece. 'Cause I never did abstract, and so one day I just said, okay, what I want to do is just focus on the physicality of applying paints and go with the colors and but not to think or have any expectations or in a way not even know what I was doing. And so what I would do, it was these beautiful colors were coming out. And then what I would do, I would sometimes I turn the painting upside down. So you see it from a totally different perspective. And I would paint upside down. And then I would turn it sideways. So I painted all these different ways. And then I did bring a mirror to take a look at it through a mirror. And this is only like a 2-hour thing. And the last time I turned it over, I looked at it and I said, I think I'm done. Because I've always had the problem with my landscape and other things is I overpaint. And I can, and so just, wow, it's done.
It's
done.
done.
So, it was just fantastic experience.
That is a great experience. And it reminds me of that story that people, or that quote people say about writing, which is an author is never done. They just abandon the project. It's hard to stop.
Yes.
I love that you brought up, I mean, because you have these great sections in your book, The Wave, where you talk about, you know, control and acceptance. And then you go into the obstructors and the enhancers, as well as life waves, which, I mean, those are such great categories.
Thank you.
Where you did this. And if I could read a section from one of the enhancers, I'd love to. So you're talking about, I'm going to put my glasses on here, trusting the flow. You were at a tennis tournament and you said, by trusting my body that my body and mind can work things out with all my help. Without all my help, I have since ridden the tennis wave to greater success and enjoyment on the courts. And I loved that section of without all my help.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm an avid tennis player. I play in
Yeah.
seniors tournaments, and um, I was way too much into my head, trying to do the different things that you learn about, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, and I never felt I played up to my ability. Certain
Mhm.
pressures in the tournaments. So once I started trusting, I say, but that my body can work it out with my mind without all my help. And that's just letting it go and enjoying what I'm doing. My game improved. And I have to be proud to say that last year I made top 10 nationally
Wow.
in doubles in my age group. And
Amazing.
and that was concurrent with writing of the book. So in athletic endeavors, so much of the wave of not having too high expectations or too much control or overthinking, et cetera, really flows over into our performance on the court or wherever you're
Right.
performing. Yeah. But
Yeah.
thank you for
Yeah.
that was
It's a
What
good.
I love, go ahead, Ben.
No, you.
I was just going to say what I love about, what you two were just discussing is that this notion, and we'll do the air quotes, the help, that confrontational conversation we have with ourselves sometimes, where we have to honor, all of our intentions are good when it comes to our pursuit of fill in the blank, artistry, painting, writing, tennis. But when you have that conversation with yourself and you say, now sometimes you're overhelping, and it's that sort of shedding certain things that's so liberating, because the opposite is we chastise ourselves and we do all this like dark, condemning thinking, which puts us at a huge loss and deficit where we feel like we've got like no agency, no momentum. So Danny, I think what you said when you like categorize that as, lighten up on the help, right?
right.
I know you've got good intentions, but not so much.
Right. It's sort of
Yeah.
interesting. Another little part of it is, and what you're talking about is self-judgment, self-criticism. And what I've learned is if I start doing that, if I make a mistake, if I start judging myself, and a lot of players berate themselves, even vocally. And so my mantra now, when that happens, is I actually say, Danny, I forgive you.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I do.
I love
And
that.
it brings a lightness,
Yes.
because none of us are perfect. We all try. We want to do our best, right?
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
can carry that overboard. We're too self-critical, as you said, Vicki,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't help us. It hurts us.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
we get stuck in a quagmire rather than releasing and surrendering and say, hey, as part of human nature, we're
Yeah.
going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
With you.
Yeah, I also love the ebb and flow from one activity to another. So, as you said, you'd work, you'd paint,
Yeah.
you'd play tennis. I mean, all the things where
Mm-hmm.
flow and creativity flows from one thing to another.
Yeah.
Yes.
The,
Yeah.
you
I
additive approach. Sorry.
no, I'm sorry. No, I was thinking in the creativity part, I call it creative cross pollination.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, we
Yeah.
pollinate
Right.
by
Right.
this flowing
Right.
back and forth.
And knowing when to pivot before you get so
Yes.
disgruntled, and
Yeah.
you said something that I think will be a takeaway for me, Danny, for a long time, because I think it's very applicable. This idea of knowing when to walk away because we risk over painting over anything, and I think sometimes we stick with stuff when we really just need to walk away and take a break because over painting
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really help.
Yeah, another example along this lines in the painting is, I may have a canvas and I painted and not finished, but it didn't feel like it's going anywhere. So like you say, I walk away from it and, I put it on the side. And I've looked at things 6 months, 9 months later, and I looked at a painting and I see things differently in a new way and bring a new freshness to it. And then I'll maybe go back to painting. And sometimes they turn out nicely. It's that to and fro. We need, as you say, Vicki, we need to be aware of that before it goes too far. If it goes too far, if we're writing, it's not going to come out as well as it otherwise could. It's not going to be as free. Yeah. So it's really it's a challenge. Um, it's to know when that's happening, right? To try to identify it. And in my case, I start to feel a certain intensity a little bit that doesn't feel comfortable. So I look for any discomfort or dis-ease, or my mind will just feel a little too clogged. So, if we see the signs, then I'll just even go outdoors. I'll take a walk, whatever, just to get out of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Very wise.
I feel it like when there's sometimes when I'm not over painting, when I'm over parenting. Like, there's the moment where, they can work it out themselves. I just need to step back, let them solve it.
Yeah.
That's so important. I've learned that with my 3 children, is to allow them to make their mistakes sometimes and learn from them, knowing that my way may not be the best way for them. And as you know, I have stories about my children in the book, some anecdotes about that. And so I'm a really true believer in recognizing they have their own paths. They're different than me. Each of my children is different from one another and me, and to try to foster that. And when I'm able to, in fact, I just had a really nice conversation with my oldest daughter this morning, in which she really opened up. And so what I have learned, and that's what I write about on that chapter on the parenting waves, is I call it attentive listening. So often our children just need to get it out. Just by our being there for them is enough.
Right.
And where I've gone astray sometimes, I will then go from there into the advice or to trying to solve their problem. And that's not what they're looking for, unless they ask you, right? Unless they ask.
Yeah, but that's such an important, I think, life lesson that's been drilled into me lots of different ways from different, sage voices along the way. It's always important to ask, what do you need from me?
Yeah.
Because so many of us will do that. I want to be loving. I want to be kind. I want to be helpful in that problem solving. But asking first, what are you looking for? Yeah. Very important. Yeah.
So what do you do when there are no waves, when the water's flat?
Well, that's what I call low tides. You probably read that, right?
Yeah.
I had that as an obstructor, but it can be as much as an enhancer to the flow, For me, as I related in the book, it happened after the publication of my last book, where you're, very involved intensely, whether it's writing or any other really committed endeavor, and then it's over with, right? And you have that not only the time is like, what do I do next? Am I going to be productive? And what I've come to learn is it's a normal part of life, and we're all going to have it. It's like, I use the example as the surfers, they go out to surf and there's no waves, or they're waiting for the good waves, and there's nothing happening, and they go home to wait for another day to surf. And I think somehow, if we can embrace the low, is to use it as a time to reflect, to deal with the discomforts that rise up, because there are discomforts, right? For me, it's sometimes I'm not being productive, am I being lazy, or I'm not doing anything meaningful, and just to sort of feel whatever is in there, right? And then it starts to go away a little bit, and then it can even become enjoyable. You might find different things and new things. And I've had this conversation with people. I have one friend, and he had just quit his job. I mean, retired, and it was a very intense job, and he was evaluating his life, and he was sharing that with me. And I said, I said, Stan, you're just having a lull.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Right.
and he said, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Best.
It's normal, you know.
But it's also,
Yeah.
as you're talking about it, it's also a gift if you can receive it that way, because
Yes.
it's an opportunity, to kind of slow down and really see. And Wynne and I love that you bring all that through and what nature's gifts are if we pay attention, because there are
Yeah.
lots of lessons there, but you have to have your eyes and heart open.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I felt that every time I've gone to climb a mountain and I come down and then it's like, oh, what's next? And I think we get a little addicted to the adrenaline
Yeah.
Yeah.
of the pursuit of the goals and forgetting that self-care is really necessary. And you put self-care in the enhancer category.
Yes. Because as you probably know from reading the book, I was into self-neglect, not self-care.
Yeah.
And self-neglect
Ah,
caused me a lot of
Yeah.
physical and emotional pain.
yeah.
So self-care is, I really, as I like to say, a life without self-care is, I believe, is a life out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mhm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
spiritually, mentally, even in all ways, physically. So I have to make it a point that I am taking care of my basic needs, especially medical, going to the doctor's appointments, eating healthy, taking breaks, getting out in nature. Is to create a balance that I need in my life, because like we shared before our session here, is way life is, and all the things that are going on, the intensity, the unpredictability. It's really important to be able to take care of ourselves in whatever ways that do that for ourselves.
Yeah, I always think of it as the spheres of influence, those concentric circles, and there's so many things in that outer circle that you have no control over. The anecdote you share about, murder and fire and, violent, destructive things, that can happen around us. We have very little influence over that. But at the core, that question of self-care versus neglect, you still have opportunities there no matter how crazy the world is around you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Well,
Can I
Danny,
ask a favor?
yes.
Yeah.
So I'm throwing a curveball here, but I love your poem Life's Lantern at the beginning of the
Thank you.
book.
Mhm.
Is there any chance you could read that for us before we let
wow.
you go?
I
Yeah.
would love to.
It's
Okay.
beautiful. I
Oh,
think
well,
it's one of
thank
the
you.
nicest openings to a book to set the stage. And Wynne and I see lots of authors do lots of different things, but it's truly lovely.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, as I say, the poems I have in the book, as you know, they're really related to some of the subjects, and I sort of would write poems as I'm writing some of the actual chapters. It's a really
Yeah.
concise way
Yeah.
of trying to get across in as few words as I can
Mm-hmm.
what I'm trying to convey. So it
Yeah.
really helps. But thank you, and I really appreciate that.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
So Life's Lantern. Obsessed with control, we can't let go, and shorten life's list the more we resist. Relinquish, no longer diminish. Let things be, start to feel free. To travel this path, use its new math. Accept and allow, even meow. Look to the waves, follow their sways, cresting in the wind, nature's magic within. Sometimes in tandem, always random, release, feel the peace. Life's rhythm of truth, lost in youth, follows no pattern, yet brighten life's lantern.
Mm.
Oh, hey,
Oh,
Good.
lovely.
oh,
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. You ladies are
Oh.
wonderful, by the way.
Oh,
Danny, well, you make it easy. So thank you
Oh,
so much for
indeed.
coming on and
Thank
spending the
you.
time to talk with us. We really
my
appreciate it.
pleasure, for sure.
We
Yeah,
do. All the best.
thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Our music is composed for Sharing the Heart of the Matter by the exquisitely talented duo of Jack Canfora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, please visit our site at sharingtheheartofthematter.com.